I call this meeting together in session
Hear you very well. Testing 1, 2, 3.
here. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So we call this meeting in session. So Kelly, why don't you call the roll?
Mr. Pansy? Ms. Hunter? Here. Mr. Alowitz?
Here.
Ms. Correa? Ms. Ortiz? Here. Ms. Brandon? Here. Vice Chairman Brown?
Here.
Okay.
Now, I see on the Pledge of Allegiance is on the,
Yeah, we
So-
don't do that.
we don't do that anymore.
We never have.
Okay, it's just there.
defaulted into the Novus, so
Okay,
council does it, but we don't.
all right. And then the next item on the agenda for this evening is the election of officers, which I don't know if we have a set procedure, but I'm going to just make a quick comment. So the last 2 meetings ago, we had a discussion about the election of officers. And it was pointed out that historically how we've done it, whoever the senior person on the commission would become,
Generally. that's not
Generally, the
always
chairman.
case.
but
It's not a
uh,
requirement.
I am now the senior person on the commission. That's hard to believe. And I do not think that I want to be the chairman, that it would be the best decision for this commission. So right now I'm the vice chairman. I'm happy to continue to be the vice chairman if anyone wants to vote for me or make that position. But I think that at this time, what I would do is the next senior person on the commission is Mike Alowitz. And I would,
Lindsay, she just started and she will not know what
Been here
she's
for
doing.
3
so-
minutes, so I'm good.
okay. The next senior person is Mike Alowitz, and I would move that he be elected chairman. So I don't know if we vote per position or we vote, and there's other nominations, or we elect a whole slate of people. How has that been handled in the past,
Well,
Kelly?
that sounds like a motion to me. And if somebody wants to second it, that would be great, or we can do them separately. That's really your
second.
call.
His motion to nominate Mike Golowitz for president, Marcia Hunter.
And then are you voting for, are you motioning for him, Terry, to be vice chair
Yeah.
as well? Okay.
Are those the only two positions that we have? We probably, isn't it? Okay. All right.
So
So we have one motion and a second for Michael as chairman and one motion for me as vice chairman, which you need a second. Correct?
I think we kind of had, you kind of made the motion.
Oh, for myself? Oh,
You can.
Okay.
I would call that a motion.
all right.
And then she seconded it. We can,
Yeah.
again, we can have her be the one who made
All
the
right.
motion and a second from somebody else. So,
Why don't you call the roll
all right,
on the motion?
all right. Actually, Mr. Brown, you were first.
Aye to that motion.
And Ms. Hunter,
Aye.
Mr. Alowitz,
Aye.
Ms. Ortiz. Aye. And Ms. Brandon.
Aye.
Okay, so now you guys are gonna have to swap.
Okay, we'll move. Take your computer with you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Mr. Chairman. That's good job.
It's big shoes to fill.
All right, so now.
All right. So next up is the presentation in honor of Gary Benjamin, our outgoing chair.
So a little different, not having to read a packet. And then coming in, walking in here empty handed, no packet. in hand. So that was, we'll do different things. Nice and relaxing, but you guys are in good hands, so I may pop in every once in a while just to make sure you run things correctly.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your service to Clive.
Gary, were you in the role for a full 5-year term on P and Z?
When I first started, there was no terms, so there was guys on there that had been on there like 20 years and beyond.
Wow.
Wow.
And they started the term after I came on board, so, which was somewhere between here and 8 years ago.
Wow.
I was in my second term and I think I had one more year left.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
since I retired last June, we're going to start doing some traveling. I didn't want to have the vice chair do too many meetings.
Well, I, for one, just, we probably worked together for a couple of years and I really appreciate your professionalism, how you handled meetings and your knowledge. It was great for the commission. And thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. All right.
All right, next up on the agenda is the meeting minutes from the supplemental meeting we had October 17th of 2022. That those meeting minutes were in the packet. Any discussion, any questions, concerns about what was in those minutes?
No.
Okay, entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes of the October 7th, 2022 meeting.
Okay, second.
Okay. All right, please take the roll.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz,
Yes.
Ms. Hunter,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Brandon
Yes.
and Mr. Alwitz.
Yes. Okay, and next up is the site plan amendment for Amari Vita at Shadow Creek. And I'm guessing this is yours, Jill?
All right, so this should look fairly familiar, probably to everyone except Lindsay. Sorry. That this was approved a handful of months ago. This is Amare Vita over on the west side of town. It's 16 acres. It's a townhome property, and they are looking at, they submitted a number of elevations, so six different layouts. As you can see in your packet, if you kind of recall what those looked like. So now that they've gone through the process or a little bit farther, they've submitted building plans, and those revisions are a little bit different. So what we have, examples of some of the changes, roof lines, dormers, overhangs. Some of the windows have been eliminated, or there's just changes in trim features. Exterior materials are generally the same. Layout and look of the building is generally the same, just some of those elements have been changed or reduced. So we felt it was enough to come back to P&Z and get your approval on that, or your input on those design changes. So these are all in your packet. We can kind of go through them if you want to, or if you've had some time to take a look at those. Pretty much what we've done is given you the design A through E or F of what was originally approved, and then what that version of the proposed looks like. And they've also sent proposed with options. And that's what your renderings are as well, is what their new proposed looks like. And then with some of those design options, which add a little bit more, but the applicant can probably tell you how often maybe some of those options happen. I'm not sure, but they are, going to be on some units and not others. So this is what we've kind of looked at as staff, is generally, you should know that what they have proposed meets all of our design criteria and code requirements. So if they would have submitted this from the beginning, it would have been something we would have recommended approval for. But just that since quite a few of those elements are different, we wanted to bring that back to see the planning and zoning, and then ultimately council's opinion on those changes, and if you are happy with those. But these designs would have been something that we would have gone for approval for. It's just up to you if those are still acceptable to you. So do you have any questions of me, or the applicant is also here and can speak on those changes a little further as well?
I have a couple. So I tried to identify what the changes were when I looked at these. And to be honest, I'm having a difficult time knowing what the changes are. For example, on that diagram that you have up right now, is the change that they're going from 2-story or a story and a half to 1-story?
No, that's, it's still just a dormer here. These are all 1-story units.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
So the difference is here. So you're looking at, these trim features in the dormers are different than the original proposed. On this one, you have these 3 upper windows and this extra materials here. That's no longer in this version. Also, you have some vertical siding here with, I think this is cedar.
It's all hardy.
Hardy board.
But it's the shake look.
Shake look of materials on this upper portion. Here they have all siding. The garage doors are different. Some of these columns are a little different. The trim features through here are also different. And that's generally kind of how these are.
They just all look bigger to me on these are not necessarily the same scale. Is that correct?
To help out, so the main reason that we pushed the change, well, a couple factors. The original architect that we had through the documents on the right wasn't able to finish it, so we had to hire a different architect. And the task really was theirs to create a set of construction documents, because traditionally things like garage doors, windows, we deal with submittals. So they're not nearly as detailed as what the original architect did from a visual standpoint. But after we were doing the 3-dimensional rendering of the massing, we realized that those roof structures were way bigger than what we were anticipating when we were going through the design process. And it would have looked a little too top heavy. So we started to bring some of those roof lines down, so it's a little bit more manageable. The first thing we noticed is some of those details, such as the dormers, the windows up there, it was going to get too tight, and from a constructability standpoint, we wouldn't have been able to get them in there. The other thing that we noticed as we were doing some of our 3D rendering and marking materials for the fly-through, we noticed that some of the residences started to look a little redundant. So rather than just a single option for the exterior of the buildings, we're offering an additional option. So as we're driving down those drive lanes, it doesn't look so redundant. So to give you an idea as far as detailing, for instance, the construction document on the left is missing things like the windows in the garage doors. It's not showing the lights on the exterior of the building. They're missing the detailing on the columns. For example, we're not just going to do straight columns. We'll have the embellishments at the top and bottom as well. So the one on the left is really meant for construction documentation.
All right. So they look good to me. I just was curious, trying to understand what the difference was.
The other factor we ran into is doing some focus groups. Ironically enough, we were going for a modern farmhouse look, and the focus groups actually suggested that our original drawings look more like a cottage feel as opposed to modern farmhouse. So that was one of the tasks that we gave our new architect, which is why we modeled it 3-dimensionally. They felt that it was a more modern farmhouse feel than our original docs. So.
Okay. And Jill, I had a question for you. I wasn't able to print it, but I read Amanda's memo. And I was struck that she did not recommend approval, which I thought she didn't recommend disapproval. She just didn't make a recommendation, which was very unusual. I've never seen that. I'm
Right.
curious, is there a reason for that?
Really, because staff is stuck a little bit because again, what they originally or what they're proposing now would meet code. We would have never have not recommended approval or maybe given extra design suggestions or anything like that with what's currently proposed. Just the number of things that are different from the original that you approved, we felt, well, you approved this and now it looks like this. That's a little bit too many factors for staff to feel, hey, yeah, let's just go with the changes. So that's why it's not really recommending approval or denial, because the new version, we wouldn't have anything against if that's what would have been presented originally. But the number of factors that are different, we felt well, that's a little much just for staff to say, yes, let's go with that, when you did approve one thing. So it's kind of on the fence of whether we're comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges. So that's why there's not a recommendation in there, because it's really up to you to decide, are these design changes fine? You're happy with those? Or no, we want to go back to something closer to the original, or if there's something in between, is up to you. So that's why we're here, because it's enough to warrant coming back, but not that there's anything wrong or that doesn't meet code with what's been presented now.
So I'm understanding it now that the one on the left was actually the original one approved by the committee. Is that correct?
This,
And this new one, because of some different architectural drawings, we now have a proposed plan on the right. I was thinking the other way around. So what I'm seeing is that the new proposed one seems to have much simplified its materials. What can you expand on why you have a selection of hardy vertical hardy siding and shingles? On the new proposed one, you have just one material on the whole house. Why? Was it?
Actually, we still do have the shake on a number of the plans too as well. So for instance, in option A right there at that dormer above the garage, that's still there as well. Again, through the focus groups, there was less emphasis on the shake. People wanted to see more of the vertical siding and the brickwork that we added in the option B. The other thing that we found was originally we were thinking that these were going to be made mostly white with some stonework. Through the focus groups, we found that people wanted to see more of the black accents and things like that. So changing some of the architectural features lended itself to have better termination points for those paint transitions and material transitions as well. So
Are the new proposals, are those stucco?
no, it's all James Hardy products. It's all fiber cement work and stone. And wood column features and things like that.
It seems like a lot of the details in the garage and the windows have also been simplified as well. So is there a reason
That's just the way it's being shown
for
right now.
that?
If you look at the three-dimensional renderings, you can pick up the windows that are in there. You're missing some because of the darkness of the garage door. You're missing a lot of the elements, vertical elements within the garage door as well. So they are very much there. I mean, just for example, the average price point of these residents are about $550,000 is where we're at. So I mean, they're going to have to sing and look nice. So
What's the square footage of that?
roughly 2,000 square feet on average, single story.
What about, they have a basement?
No, sir.
Do you have four-sided architecture on these, or is it just elevate the front that you need,
Four-sided.
but that you have to use the materials on the similar materials wrapped all the way around? So there wouldn't turn to a horizontal siding going around?
Horizontal and vertical, in some cases.
Like if it's vertical on the front, does it say vertical on the other three sides as
On a few of the
well?
Locations, not all the way around. We wanted to break up the monotony because if we found a couple of houses where they tried doing that, and it looked so redundant, it just didn't look right at all. So we've got a combination of both going around.
Okay.
So the price point from the approved and the proposed is then similar?
If
But
anything, it's gone up actually.
Oh.
Originally, we were right around 5.25 as an average. We're right about 5.5 right now.
Just because of inflation?
Man, it's going up. It's incredible. This particular product in this market is definitely in high use right now. It is age restricted too. I don't know if you mentioned that.
55 and then above.
Plus, it's not just advertised 55 plus, it's actually verified.
And what, when would you break ground if we approve this? Or then it goes to city council, they have to,
We already have.
you already have.
So we've got 100% of the utilities. We've got half of the stormwater in already. And they're currently digging foundations.
So since this was already approved,
Yeah, right, yeah.
they started with construction, but we weren't going to give any building permits until obviously the construction drawings were approved, and that's part of that plan set. Was the new proposal was part of that plan set. So yeah, they've already started quite a few things. I think there's 11 foundations.
And it's
12.
15 foundation permits have been issued. And actually, it's worth noting, unit E within this set has not changed. So the new architect actually designed unit E. So if you look in the original approval, that building looks closer to what we're proposing versus the rest of these. So that was another reason that we knew that we were most likely coming back here, because we knew that there was a stark contrast between unit E and the rest of the ones that have been approved.
I just had one thing in the write-up. We do talk about it being hardy plank, and thanks for verifying that. But then we also say, or a similar material that allows for customization of color, texture, and material. And it just seems like we really want it to stay a cement board and not a different material. And it sounds like that's not a problem, but the whole point is to make sure it doesn't turn into vinyl, right? So I just, in our write-up, I thought we were allowing too much variability. It doesn't sound like that'll be a problem, but.
No, that's not the same. I think it's just, you know, if you're using a similar product that doesn't have the Hardy Plank name,
Right.
but is the same thing.
Right.
It's just covering that.
Right.
Kleenex facial tissue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any other questions?
No.
All right, take a motion on this.
I'll move to approve the site plan amendment of the Amera Vita at Shadow Creek Development, as discussed in more detail in Amanda's memo of January 5th, 2023.
And do we have a second?
I second.
Ready? Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Brandon,
Yes.
Ms. Hunter.
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz
Yes.
and Chairman Elwitz.
Yes.
Gotta get used to that.
Okay. And next up is the University Avenue corridor study, and we're going to keep the meeting officially open.
Yeah, everybody needs to move down there, though.
Okay.
Having more people come in.
Yeah, if you guys want to take a break, go to the bathroom, get something to drink. Because we told everyone else, plan on 6 o'clock, so if we had to make.
Okay.
You know, fill a couple minutes here, feel free to take that, because we probably have some more folks showing up.
So we will take just 5 minutes here, and let the rest of the group show up. And then rearrange here. Appreciate your working with us on our layouts. It's a little different than our normal setting for P and Z meetings and so forth, but we want to make sure that we're all down here able to have kind of a conversation around this university part of the university having a corridor plan. Just give us a couple minutes to kind of get this thing rearranged, and then we'll get ready to the meeting.
I think we have
I mean, if you want to.
Yeah, and we do have your PowerPoint up here.
Okay. Yeah, we can have some more tables and chairs.
Yeah, because I didn't receive your invitation. But so I can just send this to those folks. If you have their emails. Let me see if I can get it real quick. Go ahead and mute the mics real quick. Mute the mics. That'd be helpful. And Chris, I've got Chris Zahas and Ted Camp coming in. Do they need to be able to speak? Will they need to be able to speak?
Yeah, low time.
Okay. Okay.
Morning, folks. Again, I appreciate you indulging us with our little different format and setup this time around, but we thought this would be a great opportunity to get both the Economic Vitality Committee as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission together. It's really, as we kind of talk about this particular project, this particular corridor, this particular portion of opportunity in the city of Clive, it really has to do with both general vitality as well as real estate and the other aspects that the Planning and Zoning Commission deals with on kind of a routine basis. So we thought this would be a great opportunity just to have a collaborative discussion about the project. In terms of the project itself, I'll let Jill and Chris kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it, but this is a project that we've been working on together with the city of West Des Moines. Unfortunately, COVID happened and kind of rearranged the planning process. We are at a point now where we've gotten through the effort itself. Again, have some general ideas on areas of opportunity. And that's really what we want to discuss tonight is from the group's perspective, those key opportunities, those key roles for the city. The city can do things, we can't do all things, and sometimes we can't exactly do what we want, and other times we can do magic and make things happen. But as we kind of talk about this, you'll hear some ideas that are really big and idealistic, and maybe we were able to work on that at some point. There are also some more specific, tangible, short-term, how do we deal with this particular space or this particular property kind of questions as well. So again, very much look forward to the conversation. We do very much want that to be the case. So let's have a conversation around the ideas that make sense to you and really what is the role of the city in terms of seeing a better space along the university corridor. So Jill, Chris, please get us going.
Yeah, my name is Jill Gregory. If you don't know, I'm the planner with City of Clive. So I was spearheading this project with Chris in the city of West Des Moines. So I was Clive's planner on that. So if you have any questions, please let me know. So this is Chris Shire. He's with Confluence. He was our consultant that was hired to do all the research, put everything together, make the plan for us, and did a fantastic job. So he's going to kick it off with a short presentation on kind of how we started, how it got going, and then we'll get right into the discussion items and really focus on those. So staff has some direction on where you'd like everything to go and what you think of the plan. And if you have any comments, concerns, questions, we would love to hear them. Take it away, Chris.
All right, Jill, thank you. So hopefully everyone can hear me. Again, Chris Shires with Confluence, your consultant hired on this. I have a team of other members from the consultant team online on Zoom. Should you ask me a really tough question that I can't either come up with the answer or fake the answer. I've got Sarah with Sam Storch, engineering consultant. Let's see, I've got Ted Camp, Chris Zahas with Leland Consulting Group, economic development analysis folks, and then David Greensfelder, retail strategist, all online. Should you ask a really tough probing question, I may defer to one of them. For this presentation, which I will try to be as brief and quick as possible, but I'd say we're a casual group. Interrupt me as I go along if you have a question, if you need me to clarify something, but we're going to just do an overview of the project, run through the outline of the actual plan document itself, which it's kind of thick, and then highlight the major components of each of the significant chapters, as well as kind of the next steps of where we go from here. So let's first just kind of clarify and refresh where this project is, what we were trying to accomplish. This is very unique, kind of like Jill talked about. This is a unique collaboration between the cities of Clive and West Des Moines. We don't often do this. So this is something to really be celebrated and acknowledged. So the University Corridor, and on the map on the screen, north is up. On the right-hand side, I'm sorry, the left-hand side, to the west is 8035. We've got 235 to the south. We've got University Avenue generally up to the north. And then to the east, we have 22nd Street / 86th Street. We can blame West Des Moines. I'm an old West Des Moines resident. We can blame West Des Moines for that confusion, right? So with that, this is kind of our corridor planning area. So obviously a lot of it is within the city of West Des Moines, but these significant and key commercial areas are within the area of Clive. And so this is a good idea for us to look at this together, because frankly, our residents, most of our community members often don't know when they go from one jurisdiction to the other. And this is one of those areas that is true. A little bit on my background, I'm from West Des Moines. I grew up in the area. I still live in the area. So this is where I shopped as a youngster. I still probably saw more movies in Governor Square than any other movie when there used to be a movie theater there. So very familiar with the area. Even remember when the University Park Shopping Center was so busy around Christmas, you could never find a parking stall. So with that, why are we doing this? It's all about pushing the economic vitality of the area. There's a lot of good demographics as far as that purchasing power in the area. That's one reason why the area has done as well as it has for as long as it has. But we can't sit around. We've had some struggles. We've had a lot of vacancies, a lot of changes. Can we move this into more of a live, work, and play environment versus just a retail or just an office area by pushing more residential, having that day and nighttime activity, making sure that we're focusing in on the pedestrian and the biker, not just the car. We include some land use components to this, as well as focusing in on where we can do some redevelopment or infill development. And of course, especially for the Clive side, stormwater management is key and was a component of this, as well as improving green space placemaking. So the document itself, we have the introduction, the why we're doing this, a summary of all the public input we received through this process, as well as these 6 main chapters, and then the summary at the end, really that action plan of those steps to take. And I'm going to touch on each one of the 6 chapters and then focus in a little bit on the action plan itself. So related to zoning and land use recommendations, we're pushing for redevelopment, identifying those areas for redevelopment or infill development, but really pushing this idea of flexibility in land use, and then more multifamily residential development. And so we've identified some key areas, and you see a lot of them on the West Des Moines side, but both the University Park Shopping Center, which today is struggling, needs some help, needs to maybe evolve into something new. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the plan. And then the Westtown Shopping Center, the one with the big 7 on it, that's another one to watch over time. It's kind of maintained itself. It keeps getting new tenants, but maybe there's some more that can be done. That's definitely an area to also watch. And then Clive zoning code, as you know, Commission, has some good flexibility in it today in your TC3 mixed use zoning district. To me, that would be one to maybe to look at to carry over into not only University Park, but the Western Shopping Center. Thinking horizontal mixed use, not just vertical mixed use. What I mean by that, horizontal mixed use, where it's a development that has a mix of multifamily residential, commercial, and office, versus a more traditional mixed use building where we're thinking first floor retail, upper floors office, residential. Those true mixed use buildings are difficult for the market to support. They're difficult to build and construct, but a horizontal mixed use development can be really a valuable thing to a community.
If they're so difficult, why are there so many of them?
So I would say that in our metro, they're not that many. It's only in a very dense downtown environment that we tend to see them. What we see is a lot more horizontal mixed use. And so the construction style is more expensive because you're thinking you're going to put a restaurant on the first floor and then somebody living right above it. So you're looking at a much more intense level of construction, higher cost. And so I'd argue to say we don't have that many. That what we're seeing is really more traditional retail development, standalone residential development, standalone office development. And so if we can push those as more of a concerted development together.
What I would say, Terry, though, is I have sensed and I have seen in a few of the neighboring communities, you're starting to see a few folks dabble in that building type. So you are starting to see these kind of isolated, relatively small, small footprint buildings, so limited amount of retail or commercial space. And really trying to get those residential units above it on 2 or 3 stories above a lower level, small retail space. The economics in the suburban environment haven't been real conducive to that building type. That's why we haven't seen it yet. But we are starting to see a little bit more of that start to try to make its place in the metro. The one thing I really am curious to see is those particular properties come out of the ground, because a lot of them are what I would call kind of plopped in the middle of suburbia or in the middle of a commercial area. So that idea of, hey, I'm going to live above and take advantage of the open space or the park or the coffee, it doesn't really, that's not really what is happening. So I am going to be really intrigued to see if these things work very well, because that product really does require that continually utilization. I live it, I work it, I can go get a coffee, I can go walk the dog, I can do all the things I need to do in that one space. And I do think that there might be some of those opportunities in our portion of the corridor, but we also have to have the market make sense of it.
Can you give some examples of some of this horizontal, like here in town?
Oh, sure.
Where can we see that?
Yeah, so an example of an existing horizontal mixed-use development would be West Glen and West Glen. So that's where there are a couple of traditional mixed-use buildings. The actual town center building is a mixed-use building. First floor retail, upper floors are apartments. But the majority of it, you have a super Target, some standalone retail buildings, you have apartments behind it. Even the village of Ponderosa, to some extent, it's kind of lending itself that way. That's kind of a good example, a ready example.
So you are talking about retail on the bottom and then living on the top, but they're still called horizontal?
No,
Okay.
just to make, I thank you for asking that question because I'm clearly not clear enough. So the apartment, imagine it's a standalone 3 or 4 or 5-story apartment building, but then you have some retail in very close proximity.
Gotcha.
Trying to think of some more examples in our metro. There's a lot of examples in other city metros, but they just tend to be a little bit easier to actually do. The construction style is a little easier. Financing is a little easier. Banks like to have pieces of property that go, separately with ownership by type. I mean, there's a lot of complicating factors on that. So I think that's probably maybe the best example.
Okay.
And then getting to Doug's point, what we're missing out in some of the standalone kind of onesie twosies, I'm going to try doing a traditional mixed use building, is it really is just kind of plopped in the middle of a parking lot. There's not all that amenity with it. It is not like in a downtown setting where, hey, I'm now going to go walk to the retail shop. There's areas in Du Bois where there's been some success. East Village actually has kind of a combination of both just multifamily residential as well as that traditional mixed use buildings, and then some standalone retail. So that's maybe another good example where it's really meeting that desire of the walkability to all the amenities. Kind of you park your car once, we still have to have room for parking of cars, of course. So that may be another good example.
But doesn't it lend itself the idea we need to be more thoughtful about the way we do implement those and pick places where we can implement those well? Like I'm thinking of Coralville, for example, right? They have mixed use property right off the highway there. And, probably 10 years ago, it was mostly farmland with kind of that plopped effect of mixed use buildings in the middle of nowhere. But I mean, I don't know if it was just coincidence and they got lucky or if they planned it that way, but it has become a very high traffic area for retail, entertainment, and they have a hotel that kind of anchors that space.
Right.
And so they been really successful with that.
And that's probably a good example. That's another West Point style. I'm thinking you're talking the landing at Corville.
Yeah, and so they have traditional, it's not all
It's kind of a
traditional
mix.
mixes, but it's a mix, yeah.
And I think that's where it really comes down to get a little less concerned about, you know, how we're doing it, more as that there's the density and the amenity and the activity that goes with it, that we're trying to get as much in there as possible, quality architecture, quality site design, quality layout as possible. So it's not just all apartments, but there's other stuff with it. It's not just all retail, there's other stuff. Another cross example where they put a lot of thought and energy into a retail center, Zona Rosa in the Kansas City Metro. Beautiful, really well done, except it does not have the residential component. It's been struggling. It's struggled for quite some time. Whereas if that had a little bit of infusion of residential kind of in tighter proximity, it might be a little more successful. Okay, great. You guys, this is perfect. Keep asking questions on stuff. Okay, so from an economic development standpoint, now, hey, these are some goals we want to try to hit. So if we're pushing for that mixed use development, you know, create those authentic places that we want to see in our community. But we do need to maybe think about, well, what kind of subsidies do we want? So moving that forward, a couple of thoughts on subsidies that our consultant team put together are two options to really increase the amount of apartments, multifamily residential we have within this corridor. So one is a per dwelling unit grant, and in this case, we're suggesting that we always have some kind of a leverage, a 4-to-1 grant, where the developer is putting in $4 and maybe the city is subsidizing $1 up to say $25,000 for each dwelling unit. This could be very effective in getting an infusion of multifamily residential. And it's something even the city can play with, set up a certain pot of money on a first come, first served basis, see how successful it is. If we really want to push the envelope a little bit, do it on a bedroom basis. One thing we know, and this is really even an equity component when it comes back to making housing for families, is it's easy to do 1-bedroom units or efficiencies, sometimes 2-bedroom units, but developers tend to shy away from 3-bedroom units. They are less profitable. So if we do that subsidy based on number of dwelling units, and so in this case saying up to $15,000 subsidy per bedroom, we might be able to get some more 2- and 3-bedrooms developed.
Are you saying that when you use the phrase multifamily residential, are you talking about apartments?
Yes. Yes. In this case, typically a rental apartments.
And is there any concern if we were to put qualifications on those grants, like further, like it has to reach a certain sustainability, rating or solar, or they have to include EV charger, things like, centered around sustainability or renewable energy?
So I think that's a great comment and a great question. Absolutely, you could put additional design standards, additional site amenity requirements, an age or an income requirement, an energy efficiency or doing solar or anything like that. Now, the one caution, the more you do, the more people it might push out, and then there is an administrative headache to it. And so having an age restricted community is a lot of fun, but now you got to monitor it and maybe then report back to the city. Same thing with any kind of income restriction. So one, the simplest, just offer a grant for whatever to get more units built. But, and this would be a discussion, I think, for the city in general, do we want to set up some parameters? And especially depending on how much interest there is in this program. If there's a lot of interest, well, maybe now you start weighing proposals by how they're meeting different standards you're setting.
I think that's really the key is if we're going down the road of having the city be an active partner in development, and it is the city's desire to incentivize or subsidize as necessary the application of residential units. So that's the first level. The city wants residential. Then everything else you want to stack on the wish list, is in essence a reduction of the value of the subsidy, or you in essence have to kind of come up with the additional money to make the balance work. Because ultimately, what you're going to find is, particularly in a redevelopment environment, and I think Chris should probably get into this a little more, the cost of tearing down or substantially modifying existing spaces to put something new in doesn't generally pencil out from a developer's standpoint. So you have to be careful with how you calibrate your wish list is what it comes down to.
Is that so even when you consider the incentives in the tax code for doing sustainability?
Those definitely, with some of the things that are coming out of the federal government around sustainability, and I would also throw in some of the opportunities that may be able to be leveraged for flood mitigation and other things, particularly in the University Park Shopping Center area. There are definitely dollars that might be able to be leveraged into the equation. So, you know, your wish list, if you can go find the money, say from the federal government, to be able to bring into the project, you know, then your wish list is easier to bring into reality from a developer's perspective.
Is there still TIF or tax abatement opportunities associated with this?
Yeah, I would say ultimately for any of this redevelopment that we'll talk about in the future here.
That seems to be the underlying problem. All those properties were noted here, developed.
Right, tax increment financing is going to be one of the larger tools that the city has as an incentive to make something happen in a redevelopment perspective or to achieve these goals that you want. The challenge is, again, with tax increment financing, what you have to kind of keep in your mind is the property has a current value. You know, again, we'll just use University Park Shopping Center as a quick example. It currently has an assessed value of $8 million. So to have any increment to share, the new thing has to be more than $8 million of value. So just again, from a simple math perspective, the idea of tearing an existing thing down and putting a new thing in is great. We like energy and activity, but the economics still get kind of wonky.
I'm with Kobe interest. So we tore down a building in Windsor Heights and redid that. So it definitely is, there's a lot of city involvement in getting a project like that done. There was a lot of hands on deck. So I understand, I'm just throwing it out there. That's definitely something that someone's gonna look for to tear down, because quite frankly, we know the buildings, you know, to rebuild whatever's there is probably $20 million as it is. So we get someone to tear something down, anything that's coming back up is gonna be more in value.
And the other trick, just again, as a level setting, is all of the real estate that we're talking about is commercial. So in Iowa, you're paying 95% of that assessed value in tax. Residential is not. Residential, and again, we could get exact, but I'm gonna roughly say it's half. So that $8 million of commercial real estate needs to be $16 million of multifamily residential just to break it and even. No increment created, just breaking even. So now we got to talk about, you know, again, $30 million project to have enough increment to kind of make the dynamics work. Again, just as a quick level set.
And that definitely brings up a really good point. In the grant program for apartments, we don't talk about TIF funding. This was a grant program that the city, in essence, has to find general fund dollars, special dollars to fund that we really, and generally cities, we don't do TIF districts for residential just because of, they don't pay a lot in taxes in comparison to commercial industrial. But I did want to share this slide where we talk about maybe a time where it's appropriate to use TIF or how we could. The one thing I should have noted early on, I would never use Courier in a presentation. My fonts are getting changed by this laptop, so I apologize. So if it looks a little wonky, yeah, no worries. Hopefully you can kind of read it. So no Courier font. I did not do that on purpose. So kind of on that other side is we talked about incentives for more retail, residential, but we do have the office and retail components. We've already talked about apartments getting an incentive. So office and retail. So really have kind of three options lined out. So option one, an enhancement grant. And so this now we're going to make that leverage a little bit stronger. So 8-to-1. So $8 of private investment, maybe get $1 match from the city. And in this case, up to $100,000 towards an existing office or retail building that's making some substantial improvements to stay competitive. One thing, and COVID really helped to push this along, is our office and retail environment's gotten very, very competitive. And then those landlords, the building owners will tell you where the rent rates haven't changed much. So how they're having to compete is the best space wins. So highly amenitized office space, really well located retail space. And then on the second part of this is a little bit of a smaller grant program for a new tenant. So you have a new tenant coming into the area, not just hopping from one stall to the next, but a new tenant coming into the area. In essence, think of this as that tenant remodel. So just a few dollars here to help leverage what they're bringing to the table might be enough to just help that new business start and relocate within the corridor, choosing this location versus one of maybe our other competitor locations. And the last one is that whole thing on TIF, and this is really, the thought is to put some parameters under it, because just like Doug talked about, we really do need to see that big jump in increment value in order for it to, one, be worth it, and let alone yield any type of funding. So in this case, we look at TIF rebate, where we're using TIF proceeds to rebate back property tax dollars spent. This is always the safest things for cities to do. You're not going out and necessarily risking money, because if the property's not paying enough taxes, the city's not rebating tax dollars back. And so in this case, we're suggesting up to 5 years, 100% of that increased assessed value, that increased tax value, for a substantial redevelopment where they're really spending investment of more than $1 million, something large enough to trigger going through that process of doing either creating a TIF district or even going through the steps of a new urban renewal plan. Any questions on that? Or thoughts?
I do, and I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble getting my head around this. And here's what my issue is.
Sure.
So you're trying to create an economic viable or redo, continue to make that university corridor economically viable corridor, correct?
Yes.
And you're telling us that you're looking at mixed use such as residential and commercial combined, correct?
Sure.
And the residential that you're talking about is apartment buildings, right?
Right.
So are you telling us that the only way you can make this university corridor economically viable for the future is to include apartment buildings along there?
It is the most viable or most likely way to make it more viable. Could you say we're not going to have any more residential in the area? You sure could. Most cities could decide that on their own. However, what we're telling you from our expertise and our analysis, that an infusion of additional residential in the area will make it more viable. Right now, we have more office and retail square footage than the market supports. One way to help kind of the hemorrhaging or slow the hemorrhaging of retail space would be to increase the amount of residential, in essence, customers, let alone many of these retail stores as well as the offices. They're in demand for workers. A lot of this could be that workforce level housing really meeting that demand. So we're not having folks having to travel great distances for employment. In essence, we're creating that live, work, and play environment in one location. And so, and there's a lot of empty space. There's a lot of extra land. There's a lot of right now vacant office building that might be really appropriate to convert into multifamily residential meeting a need. I think we've discussed as a metro-wide, that we're in a big housing shortage. Even tonight we listened to the commission presentation about these cute new homes being built at about $550,000. That's not entry level. I don't live in a $550,000 house. I probably never will. Well, with inflation, maybe I will. So how does everyone else live? And the folks working in a lot of these jobs are nowhere near that and are somewhat maybe more mobile and don't wish to own a house. And so we really see this as a very positive thing by adding residential in the area, something we don't have. We have single family on the fringes, and there are some apartment projects, developments in and around the area. But this could be a really good thing to kind of use up some of that vacant space, bring new customers and new employees.
I think overall too, just Sarah, to your specific question, we have known for a number of years, we have too much retail. Too many square feet of retail concentrated in this specific area. And even in kind of the west urban spaces, heavier or over concentrations in certain areas. University Corridor is one of those, 86th Street is another. And that's why you're seeing vacancies starting to show up more prevalently. You're seeing migration of some of the Class A tenants to West Glen or other types of new shopping spaces that are newer and more exciting. So we can't just continue to kind of go down the same road and expect something different to happen is the situation with University Corridor and 86th Street Corridor.
I'd say it's more the retail type. I'd say your smaller retail spaces, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500, 2,500 there, you're having no trouble leasing those anywhere in the community. But when you get to big mid-box retailers, when you're talking 12, 15, 20,000 square feet, you can't refabricate those buildings to cut them up. So that's the problem is I think a lot of the product we have along the corridor is that mid-size retail that used to be the Best Buys and the Bye Babies that have now moved out to West Des Moines and Waukee.
Without question.
So
Without question. We have a lot of that. The University Park Shopping Center is that example exactly. You got a 40,000 square foot Toys R Us. Nobody has come up with an idea other than turn it into some type of mini storage. Repurpose the inside for storage, boats, RVs, put some small units in, whatever. You know, those large format 20 to 40,000 square foot spaces are really, really challenging to find an alternate use for. Sometimes we get lucky. You know, we had the Dolls on 100th Street. Went away. They were able to repurpose that into two kind of smaller boxes and been reasonably successful with. We got lucky with the Dolls out on 156th Street, but we were able to repurpose that into a pretty productive space. But those are relatively speaking unicorns with respect to these strip center, large format strip centers.
So you're gonna have, what you're telling us is, and what you're asking us is that you're gonna have to re-envision what buildings or residents are along this university corridor. And for Clive, what we're gonna have to consider is amending zoning regulations to allow these type of mixed developments versus solely commercial. Is that right?
Yeah, the interesting proposition though in your question is in terms of the University Park Shopping Center specifically, the zoning has been put into place, started that 20 years ago. 19 years ago, we changed the zoning ordinance along 86th Street corridor to allow for mixed uses. Horizontal, vertical, it didn't matter. It was, we were simply going to accept a change of format of the property. And our goal was to have the product be more important than the use. So we wanted a good building and a good arrangement that really capitalized on the green belt, highlighted the ability to live, work, and play right in that nice, neat new development. It meant going up a couple stories, great. We were okay with that. That was a great idea, but the market said no bueno. No, we're not interested in that at all. Again, a lot of it is probably just simply the ground economics of tearing down existing buildings. But we've had no takers. So that is going to be a question, is even if we have it in place, you're still going to have to be active at some point in encouraging the market to accept.
Okay, and that's what these recommendations are, to encourage the development of this market. Hasn't worked in 20 years in 86 feet, but it might work on University, right?
Maybe.
All right, I'm just understanding. I'm not voicing any opinion on it. That makes sense to me as you explain it, but I didn't understand the concept.
Now again, that is specific in terms of that zoning to the University Park Shopping Center. That is a unique area. This is part of the 86th Street corridor. The West Ridge Shopping Center at 100th Street, or the space kind of generally around 114th Street. Those are just basic zoning. So the base zoning would allow for the commercial use, whether or not it's office or retail, doesn't really matter, but would not allow residential by right. So if we do want to try and encourage that mixed use concept beyond University Park Shopping Center area, then there would be some regulatory changes that would be necessary.
So I do have a question, or I don't know what it is, a comment or a question, but so downtown Des Moines, Nationwide Insurance, they had 3 buildings, if I remember correctly. And because most people are working from home these days, they eliminated 1 building, and now the police and the city, they're moving to that building. So here in Western Park, I mean, we say it's University Avenue, but you have some things in here, and it's not Clive, but it's still part of the plan. There's a lot of buildings, office buildings there, that pretty much you go by and the parkings are empty and they're super huge. Were the city, either of Clive or, in whatever jurisdictions we are, or West Des Moines, would there be some sort of studies to see the occupancy of those buildings and see what can come? And I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly.
Yeah.
So do you have an idea where, these buildings will, disappear, but then it will be reimagined? Will that has to be studied further, or is this taken into account in here?
Yeah, so great question. So early on with our analysis, we did look at generally occupancy rates. We also looked at changes in building values or property values over time. We did the market study, market analysis for the region, focusing in on the corridor. And so that analysis is what was driving the recommendations related to flexibility on zoning, pushing multifamily residential as a way to eat up some of this extra office and retail space, as well as even the incentive programs. And so that was taken into consideration. Really, a next step would be, as a property owner wants to do something, there might be an extra level of analysis there to determine, no kidding, what could be the tax increment generated by TIF with redevelopment, or is there an alternative to an incentive program that would make more sense? What's kind of nice about this is, I think with getting something on the books for both communities, it kind of lets that development community know that the cities are committed to doing something. And on a maybe an easier basis, if you literally adopted 1 or 2 of these actual programs, they know exactly what you're proposing. So short answer is additional study might be necessary, but probably on a project by project basis. All right, great questions. Let's talk a little bit about transportation and walkability. Again, ignore those fonts. It's driving me nuts only a little bit. A part of this is quality of life. Thinking especially if we're going to push to have more people, residents in the area, we need to be thinking of moving people by other means than just car, transit, using the bus system, bike, and walking. And so in this case, on the West Des Moines side, there's a little bit of thought of, do we do an analysis on West Town Parkway? It's a 5-lane arterial that's not quite carrying 5 lanes of traffic. Maybe that can be reduced in size. But then more collectively between both cities, how do we improve that bike infrastructure? We've got the green belt without a real easy way to get to the green belt from the corridor. And then a special push in this area enhanced DART service, bus service. We talk about something called a mobility hub. Could say like Valley West Mall has historically kind of been used as a bus transfer station, a spot where you can do a park and ride. But this is where we think bike, walking, being dropped off by a Lyft, Uber, something that where there's a lot of different types of getting around in one location. One thing we did hear from property owners, major employers, is they have plenty of employees that do need to get to work by bus. They're coming from other locations. And if we increase the amount of multifamily residential, there may naturally be the demand for additional transit services. And so when I say transit, think going by bus. It's just a fancy way to say that. Okay, a little bit more included in on infrastructure analysis. So as we're thinking of redevelopment, do we have the sewer and water capacity? There are always some limitations and certain things that need a little bit of additional study, but most importantly to the Clive side is a commitment by the city of West Des Moines to continue some of their drainage improvements that there's a very old agreement on related to drainage to Walnut Creek to reduce Walnut Creek flood impact, as well as there's some improvements on the West Des Moines side related to Blue Creek, which is kind of the creek that runs along 235, and some of the improvements there. One thing I would note, we have two kind of options related to Clive drainage basin improvements. So Walnut Creek again is to complete West Des Moines' original, what they're called the West Town PCP study, where it identified how it can physically make improvements to their stormwater system to reduce the flood impacts or the stormwater drainage impacts in Clive. As an alternative, there may be some areas within the city of Clive to make basin improvements that are a little more cost effective or provide a little better benefit. And this is something we would hope that both cities would work together on to look for key opportunities, say with the redevelopment, where we can create a regional holding pond that maybe is even a benefit. So in particular, the West Ridge Shopping Center does have some spots where maybe some drainage basins would have multiple benefits. Okay, now let's get into site. Please go ahead.
One thing I want to point out, so in the study, there was some discussion about broadband analysis for
Yes.
West Des Moines. I didn't see that for Clive, right? And I'm looking at the map here, and it, outside of the area just to the east of 8035, there's really only one choice for those, those tenants in the commercial districts. Most of it seems to be CenturyLink, but is there any recommendations or anything to take into account there for Clive as we're kind of, because if you're talking about turning this into multi-use, residential space, all of us have had experiences with CenturyLink probably. So it'd be good to have that kind of.
MetroNet is moving in.
Yeah.
The 86th Street to 100th Street part of Clive is their last area on their development map.
Well, yeah, so that in my neighborhood.
Well, that's not in our neighborhood yet. Can you get us Google? Google's.
So if I could put a plug that's not in this, and maybe we should expand what we have in this recommendation just a little bit. But I think, and it's called Plant the Speed, the West Des Moines initiative, where the city has, in this case, made an agreement to have fiber tubes pushed throughout the entire community. And then with multiple service providers can then light fiber within those tubes to each individual home and business. Maybe that's something to consider.
And I think that was something that West Des Moines was pretty progressive on, and in having Google Fiber come in and lay the conduit, so they're paying for it, but they get kind of that first to market benefit. But that conduit is city owned, so anybody else can come in and put it. It's not specific to Google, so that's something that it opens that market up.
Property owners will allow it to happen. I mean, we've had it in West Des Moines on several of ours. They'll come to us, we'll sign the easements, go ahead, connect to the building, because our tenants are asking for it. They're tired of CenturyLink, most of them, Mediacom too.
I think it'd be interesting, and we'll definitely follow up with West Des Moines. Obviously, with their system that they're deploying throughout the city, they're going to be running a line right down University to support their side of the university. I wonder if there isn't an opportunity to share, borrow.
So I'm gonna overshare here, but so I bought my house specifically, not only because it was in Clive, but also because it was literally across the street from dark fiber.
From where?
A dark fiber, so that's fiber optic internet that hasn't been turned on, it hasn't been utilized by somebody yet. And I still don't have MetroNet.
Is MetroNet gonna do the same thing as this Google? Is it the same hardware?
With respect to what they're going to deploy in the city of Clive, yes, they are going to deploy the opportunity for every parcel, residential and commercial, to connect to a high-speed fiber internet service.
Same quality service.
So
That not,
You start-
not quite.
yeah, you start getting into a lot of like apples and oranges comparisons, because the fiber optic cable itself is pretty much a commodity, right? Like, as long as it's multimodal and of a certain, caliber, it's gonna carry the speed you need. It's the optical terminals at the end that will dictate, whether you get a gig or 2 gig or 10 gig, right? That is up to the service provider, right? So Google offers services up to 10 gigabit per second. You want to pay for it, it's not cheap.
One point of clarification, though, just the key difference is that no portion of MetroNet's network is owned by the city of Clive. Whereas in West Des Moines, they've got a different arrangement with Google Fiber.
So my understanding for West Des Moines is Google still owns the fiber that's going through the conduit. It's just the conduit that they're laying is going to be owned by the city. So, and that's a, fiber optic is very thin, even the insulated underground stuff. So a properly sized conduit can carry multiple fiber strands. So you could have multiple service providers in that same conduit if it's city owned.
But Clive, you got MetroNet's coming in and they're gonna own the conduit and the wire.
Yes. It'll be something that I'm interested in evaluating anyway, to see if we can't capitalize on just another opportunity as it relates to those folks along University. These couple key nodes we're talking about. We'll check that out, and then yes, we'll have to see how MetroNet is able to service the rest of the city.
I got the feeling MetroNet's not gonna be too happy with that idea.
It's not really their choice. We don't have an exclusive arrangement.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to hear.
So they're just simply a service provider.
That's a good idea. Sure, get that university going there, just north of university, quarter mile, we'll be really happy.
Well, I don't have it yet, but every time a Google truck is in my neighborhood, the whole neighborhood gets excited. That's it. All the pipes are in the ground. They haven't run anything to our houses yet. But those guys have been working even in the snow, and we've been really excited because I know certain areas have been lit already, but I'll let you know. It's not without a little pain, they're in the yard, they're digging things up. Yeah, it's a little easier to forgive thinking, oh, this would be great when it's there. I wanted to talk a little bit about site analysis, site redevelopment opportunities. We identified several on the West Des Moines side. I really want to focus in on the one kind of key one on the Clive side that we've already talked about. And so that's, of course, the University Park Shopping Center. Now on this map, forgive me to make that all fit on the slide. We're going north is different directions. So north is to the left there of the University Park Shopping Center, and you obviously see Walnut Creek in the green belt to the left there to the north. But what's harder to see on this map is a little yellow line that kind of cuts through the parking lot on all the buildings, makes its way to University. That's that floodplain line. And then the floodway line is the red line that's a little closer to the creek. That's one of the biggest impediments to any kind of redevelopment on this site. Even doing a substantial remodel on any one of those buildings that's within the floodplain is by law, once you go above a certain amount of improvement, you have to elevate the structure, floodproof the structure, and that can be very impractical. Not 20 years ago, this area was very, very successful and popular as a retail center. I talked about shop there, but Toys R Us or Kids R Us, and it was hard to find a parking center. I spent a lot of time in the Pier 1 there. Personally, my wife buying more superfluous pillows. I mean, that's just, what you do, right? But over time, buyer preference and the way we shop, as well as retail competition, would tell us that you would never, ever design a shopping center like this again. Those back buildings are way too far away from the road. It's a little bit of an alley configuration. So really going forward, we would envision this being redeveloped in some completely different manner. And this is where maybe a substantial subsidy would be necessary. Perhaps the north end of the property, the significant area in the floodplain and the floodway, maybe that is acquired by the city to expand the greenbelt, to expand that as a park, as a trailhead. And then the area could be redeveloped with a mix of multifamily residential. And then to be fair, we've got some single family neighbors to the west on the bottom of the map. Maybe we transition to some row houses, townhomes. However, in another scenario, maybe we still maintain a smaller footprint retail area that is a little closer proximity to University Avenue, like retailers would maybe prefer. And yet we're still transitioning and offering some areas for multifamily residential. Some of the big limiters to this, or the inhibiting factors to this, is this property is under multiple ownerships. So people need to play together. A lot of this will be expensive. It won't pencil out on its own. So it's going to need some type of subsidy to make it happen. And it probably can't happen all at once. There'll need to be a phased plan, working out deals with different property owners to kind of phase that development in over time. But we think that this would be a key thing that if you wanted to spend some time and energy on, look at that without Doug getting too mad at me, because he knows that this would be a lot of work. But this is probably one of those key spots in your corridor that's really, really struggling, that you're just going to have a kind of a re-tenanting of maybe nothing shiny or fancy or new. It's going to be cheap retail space, or eventually cheap record storage space, which will have a declining value over time. It'll pay less and less in property taxes. Something I would really think could be a real asset, but will be a lot of work. It will be a heavy lift, and it will be a lot of investment.
Chris, this is already, Jill, this is already in our 86th Street study, right? This
particular property.
This overlaps.
It overlapped, yeah.
So it is in the plan that we approved a few months.
Interestingly, though, both consultants kind of came to the same conclusion.
They said the same things and they drew up something very similar conceptually.
Independently.
Yes, yeah.
So did you talk about something a little more sexier when you were playing around with that? I mean, that's, in my mind, that's a really cool spot. Like, could be an open air market or something to draw a bike, they're right on the bike trail. I mean, did you ever throw around some more fun ideas about this? Because this is, no offense, but and this would require a lot more work. So somebody with a passion to make it happen, but I could see that being more of not an entertainment bar thing, but something unique in that space and distinct by nature, right?
So, one idea is you think of like a 3-season market or a year-round outdoor market. So think of in Kansas City Metro on the north end of downtown, you have a city market in the river market area. That is a very small footprint. Now it's totally redeveloped, the old key area. I mean, it's you don't even recognize it from 20 years ago. So you could always look at something like that. There's just a lot of competition in the metro for those types of locations. So that even takes a longer vision, a heavier lift, a bigger subsidy. That could be maybe a component. And so you might imagine, say in this scenario on the screen, that there's some type of component with that, really focusing in with the trailhead. And so maybe that's a part of a larger development that still includes some traditional retail and multifamily residential.
And what I would say in response is, I don't disagree with the idea that's not very sexy. The point of this exercise was to try and understand the base economics. That doesn't pencil out. That unsexy thing requires a lot of city partnership. To stack on the other one, it's just going to really require some creativity. That being said, if the city is going to be engaged in discussions and partnerships and opportunities here, in my mind, whatever the thing is, has to absolutely leverage to the end, the Greenbelt Trail, Walnut Creek, the pedestrian and bike environment, and really just bring that thing right up into the development itself. Whether or not there's a gathering spot or a shelter building or a market or whatever it is, it's just kind of like another thing. But the concept would have to be absolutely integral to the green belt itself, in my opinion.
At one time, I remember them talking about renting kayaks or canoes to take down the Walnut Creek. Is that still something that's on the table?
I would love to figure out a way to do that. It's just Mother Nature doesn't want to cooperate. It's typically one of those situations where she doesn't want it to rain, so we don't have enough flow to kayak or tube.
Or this
Or we're flooded.
She's gone all the way off the deep end, and now we've got raging river going through there. So unfortunately, just the dynamics of Walnut Creek, particularly, through this section of Walnut Creek, we don't have the base flows to really support that activity. Once you do get down a little bit, Windsor Heights and then down, you definitely do start opening up some opportunities. But it would take quite a bit of effort just to kind of get it to a point where it's usable. It would be very dangerous. You would not want to send your kid down Walnut Creek in a tube right now.
We had a member suggest like a river walk, kind of like in San Antonio here to deal with flooding. And I thought that was a great idea. And I used to live in Oklahoma City, and they had a similar river walk, but just on a much smaller scale. And so, yeah, they had boats going down, like, they could be in a kind of a tour boat, kind of like a duck boat. It was fun. And I feel like, yeah, this is just right for that sort of thing. And we've got the water and we need to control it. And that's, I just thought that was a fantastic idea.
Do a really neat wetland thing.
Yeah, right. I mean, there are those opportunities, whether or not it's taking, obviously the Clive Greenbelt, the approach that's been used for that is really kind of that very passive recreation, lack of recreation, just passive use. But that idea of having a more kind of built edge in certain locations, that was actually discussed again 19 years ago when we worked on the 86th Street plan for this particular area. So I do think there might be those opportunities to evolve some of that thought process from just having it be a very passive space to, at least in certain locations, really trying to activate and have that interaction both in and out of the spaces. And then, yes, I do think, there are opportunities, again, this particular property, where that north half of the property might have opportunities for creating value through wetland banks or flood mitigation. I mean, we could, there's actually a great oxbow opportunity within the meander of the stream there that we could create quite a bit of additional flood storage capacity. And we've been finding out that those types of features, although they seem kind of odd, they actually do store quite a bit of water and do have some positive benefits to the downstream property. So we do see that there's an opportunity for that interplay between kind of the recreational component of the Greenbelt as well as the water resource part of it. You take those two things together and marry it with a productive piece of real estate. Again, that's really fun to think about.
Doug, would there be any chance to use federal money to buy the north part of the property with the old Joanne Fabrics building if we like parcel that separately?
Yeah, definitely. That's again something that I've had noodling around in my mind is if we're going to get engaged here, bringing those dollars from other places, hazard mitigation funding may provide an opportunity to cover a portion of an acquisition, for example.
All right. Well, I like the thinking on this already. I just want to wrap up on the last chapter and then just kind of a summary of those action steps. There was a desire for this equity component really making sure that we're looking at all members of our community and their needs. The biggest pushes within that is thinking housing and housing appropriate on income and family styles. Thinking not just 1-bedroom efficiencies, but can we get more 3-bedroom? So you've heard some of the policy discussions or incentive discussions earlier, continuing those partnerships, say with Polk County Housing Trust Fund, thinking of transit, transportation, pedestrian circulation, all those things are key to that equity component. So then lastly, those action steps. And so in the plan document itself, we broke them up into West Des Moines actions and City of Clive actions related to zoning and development, infrastructure, and then this branding concept. And so for Clive, we're talking about continuing to work towards limiting the conversion of the hotels into something maybe less desirable, but more purpose-built. So if we're converting our offices or anything, that it truly is purpose-built quality housing, adopting incentives for redevelopment specifically related to University Park Shopping Center and working on that project, following some interim development steps, just like this slide is. Maybe one of the first steps is acquiring that north side of the property. Following some of the recommendations we have on walkability improvements, sidewalks, crosswalk enhancements, and then coordinating with DART and City of West Des Moines to identify those areas for bus stops, additional transit services, and then partnering with the City of West Des Moines to create a distinctive branding and marketing plan for this corridor. How collectively can both cities work together? I think both sides of the university need to be successful and healthy for the benefit of all. And then sharing those costs for some of that district signage improvement, intersection treatments, enhancements, improvements that we've generally been making in a lot of our communities throughout the metro area. But in this case, we could really partner and have a cohesive message for the university corridor. Okay, and so just to recap, because I know you'll have some more comments. This has already been through to the City of West Des Moines, the Planning Commission, and the City Council. The City Council did accept this plan. And so obviously tonight we're in front of the commission, glad to have the committee here as well. And then assuming everything's going smoothly, we'll be on to next Thursday's City Council meeting for their consideration. And that was everything I had in my Courier font presentation that shouldn't look quite like that. So, but happy to continue the discussion.
Chris, the report says it, and I think we all know the Valley West Mall really is the centerpiece of this area. So how much of what we're talking about is it viable to initiate, push on before Valley West Mall is settled?
Yeah, so frankly, one of the things that really slowed this plan was we spent a lot of time spinning on the Valley West Mall property. We did a lot of extra analysis. We did some pretty detailed TIF analysis. We tried a couple of other things as well. That had been originally, as we looked at it, even in my own memory as a young child, when the mall was the big thing, was such a catalyst for so much development in the area. However, it is still not the only thing. This is a larger corridor, and we're talking about two larger cities with population centers. So I wouldn't right now keep them all. It's kind of unknown status from pursuing, corridor enhancements, working on redevelopment sites, both on the West Des Moines and Clive side. But I think it is going to be really important for the city of West Des Moines, and I definitely said this to them. They need to be doing everything, and frankly, their economic development folks and their mayor and council are doing everything to try to have something great happen on the mall property. I think it'll just be a matter of time, on the south side of the mall, the old Valley Watson Center. You've got the new West Bank building. You've got Claim Stock that took over the old fitness center, did a nice remodel. Eventually those two banks, something will happen to them. I just think there's momentum there. There's value there. Something will happen. The mall site's going to be a heavy lift. There are some really large numbers thrown about on what it would take to do a full-on redevelopment of the site. And so I think it's just a matter of time. It'll have to be something completely different. I don't think it can survive as that standard mall structure you see today. That'll probably have to be completely torn down and something new done. However, it is a unique opportunity. Nowhere else do we have that large of a piece of property in the middle of a developed area with a large customer base. You know, it could be a pretty nice development. It'll just be a heavy lift for those involved.
I think though, you know, my opinion, the answer to your question of, does it make sense to put a lot of investment in the corridor without knowing what's going to happen to the elephant in the room, if you will? And I think that is absolutely a concern, right? You know, in its current configuration, if we knew that it was going to at least kind of stay at least where it's at, which is still functional. I mean, it's got some uses. They're trying to backfill it with some smaller spaces here or there. You know, I don't think people would be that scared of making investments adjacent. But if that thing goes downhill and kind of goes dark, if you will, that will have a pretty significant impact on people's perception of the area and could substantially inhibit risk-taking. So it is something that we're very nervous about. You know, you don't, taking a big swing generally in that area is probably not something you're going to see us recommending. That being said, you know, at some point, the University Park Shopping Center might be something we suggest taking a swing at regardless of what happens to the mall, because I think it's going to be so kind of greenbelt oriented, particularly if we are willing to kind of go down the route of having a residential component. You know, that could be a nice residential neighborhood regardless of what happens to the mall. It won't have as much impact on what happens there. The Westward Shopping Center, that one, I'd be real anxious about putting big investments in there without kind of knowing what's happening. Down here, you know, again, I think you'll have a little more freedom to do things that are primarily going to be driven with the reinvestment in the interchange here in the next few years by DOT and what the city kind of wants and decides to do with the 114th Street corridor down in this space. But again, I think that's going to be probably more neighborhood oriented, so probably a little more insulated from the mall as well. Would be my opinion in that. So Jill outlined some kind of remaining things that we're noodling on from a staff perspective, and just we've had a lot of conversation around them, but just kind of want to end up making sure that from all of your perspective, we have your ideas and your thoughts or your guidance on some of these kind of policy questions, both kind of from that short-term and long-term perspective of what should the city's role be in this corridor. So maybe I'll just spend a few minutes kind of working through that, and we'll move on from there.
Yeah, I was sort of reading, reminding myself of these. I think we really touched on the first one for market economics of really how much the city wants to invest or not invest in some of those big ideas or big projects. At this point, it's kind of status quo. If a developer comes to us with something, you know, if there's any ideas, I guess my thought on here from a staff perspective is we have, it's probably touched on later too, but we have had some calls and inquiries, especially about University Park Shopping Center, about kind of what to do in the interim. You know, this plan of the not so sexy townhomes or mixed use or retail development, if that's much farther down the line, and the status quo now is some vacancy, some not, some new users. some empty spaces in those buildings. Well, what do we do in the meantime? Is everybody happy with that? Or is that okay? Or does do we need to look for ways to help out those vacant tenants or those property owners into putting other things in there, or possibly even adding an outbuilding? Right now, our code really doesn't allow for it there. But is that something of interest to try to spark something there? But is it also worth it if ultimately we want it to be something else? So that's kind of some of the phone calls staff gets, some of the inquiries about University Park Shopping Center. So that's kind of the big thing in Clive on our side, that we have some input on.
And that is absolutely one of those roles of the city. So city can, in essence, be in the way. Say what's there is what's there and use it to the best of your ability. Alternatively, the city can modify or relax requirements and standards and allow those three existing property owners to be more creative in the space, whether or not that is, again, taking the old Toys R Us and making that into a storage building. Is a storage building better than a vacant building, for example?
I would think that'd be a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like the nail in the coffin to the whole university. board. If you just want to end it now, go ahead and let them build a storage. building. I'd rather see the building torn down and green space, or use a blight grant or something to get the thing out of the way, and city acquires it like Urbandale did with that corner of 100th and Douglas. And we put a for sale sign on it and see what somebody can do. I would, just please don't do a storage unit there.
Other thoughts? Along that agreement.
Have the property owners expressed any ideas or come to the city?
Yeah, those are what we've been
Oh, that's
getting
what they-
is, hey, city, will you allow us to take the kind of unused parking lot right in the corner on either side of the entrance, and put a scooters in, or put Taco John's in. So, those out parcels in the front are probably, maybe not $1 million, but they're pretty valuable potentially as little out parcel developments. We get that question quite a bit.
Like Starbucks at Westridge.
The big boxes, again, nobody is gonna wanna re-tenant them. So you're either gonna get the kind of revolving door of Rush Markets or
Spirit Halloween.
Spirit Halloween or whatever it might be. Or yes, we've had the inquiry to kind of repurpose it to interior climate controlled storage space. Some of the other spaces, the smaller spaces, but not the big ones. We've had lots of inquiries to kind of go to, I don't want to say industrial uses, but things that are like, the most recent one was like a fancy car detailing type place that's going to put on all kinds of
Car shows
accessories
and-
and all kinds of stuff, but it has a garage door in the back and maybe some kind of little storefront in the front.
It's a garage door in the front.
Or in the front, wherever, but garage door, that kind of use, or, some of the other things, we've had some weird ones, like, somebody wanted to take, because the building square footage was relatively cheap rent, to go in there and do, hydroponic microgreen growing. Those kinds of odds and ends, mom and pop type uses. Those are the types of things we're getting more requests for. They're not permitted by right now. So that's the city's take is no, you can't do it. You can't outlot it. You can't make it into a mini storage. You can't do this. You can't do that. So we end up with kind of what we have, which is come and go retailers for the most part. And that's a choice, which is a very fine choice if that's what we want to do. But we want to make sure that we're having that conversation so that we can be confident in that conversation. conversation with the next person who comes and asks.
So if we go down the path of, okay, we want it to look like that ultimate vision, right? But in the meantime, start maybe loosening, allowing some of those car detailers or hydroponics or whatever. What kind of setback does that put for that overall plan? Because now these people have a vested interest in keeping it the way it is. Because, you know, assuming they're doing well and whatever they're doing, they don't want to be moved out and, you know, make this into a green space or make it into the ultimate vision. So what's the risk there?
Very high. And it's not just the tenants themselves, because frankly, the tenants, based on the lease, you know, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year.
No, I mean the owners, right? Like they're able to get ahead.
The owners, based on my understanding of their economics, you know, they don't have a large basis in it. So they don't need it to be 100% full. And they're also very satisfied, generally speaking, with what I call mom and pop rent rates. So they're making enough to be reasonably happy. They're not making enough to substantially reinvest. And they're definitely not motivated to take huge risk of scraping it and do something else. So yes, if we kind of allow the middling, you know, that real estate, practically speaking, has another 20 or 30 years of life. And that's what they'll do, is just keep using it. I mean, that's the same issue that we've had with 86th Street, for example, is that real estate is not bad enough to tear down. It's not good enough real estate to take risk of scraping it and putting something else on. So we'll just keep doing what we're doing.
I think ultimately right now we have to set a plan for the next couple of years, because I don't know what kind of development we would anticipate happening in this interest rate environment with, you know, and we don't have a billionaire, you know, we don't have a Dennis Albaugh or Gary Kirk to come in and develop these for us. So, I mean, maybe we do, maybe he's up and coming or they're up and coming, they could be, you know, wherever she could be out there. So I'm looking at this as we've got to look at this property on how we're going to utilize it until there's an opportunity. And it might be until the properties deteriorate to the point where the owner just says, I've got to put a $2 million roof on it. I've got to replace this. I've got to replace that. I got to tear the building down. It makes more sense. Or, and like in our scenario, we go out there as an economic development group, you know, that group goes out and entices that tenant. I don't know who it is. I mean, I don't think you're going to get IKEA. I don't think, you know, someone like that is coming. But do we start with a Craft and Barrel or something like that, or, you know, some of those type of not in our market, and we aim to make this area more selective. So it is nicer in retail. I think of Iowa City, I think of, you know, more the Penn Mall than, you know, Coralville or anything that with the walkability, which creates that camaraderie, that, you know, cohesiveness amongst the tenants. I think the area has a lot about, you know, but finding the person to do it now or even in the near future seems really suspect. I just don't think it's going to happen. I like where we're going with this. I think the whole area needs to be redeveloped. I think a lot of it is just the size of the retail base. The 100 or the 50-foot bay lengths and stuff like that. Tenants can't use those. You know, any retail tenant, any restaurant tenant. I know there's probably lacking of grease traps, so we're probably missing some restaurant opportunities throughout that. And that's cost inhibitive right away.
Yes.
You know, depending on the size, you're looking at 6 figures just to get started. So in the meantime, I think you status quo it. I don't know that you allow though the scooters, because I agree that if you put that there, that's, you know, they're going to put a significant investment into it. They're going to fight any opportunity that doesn't involve them into the future.
So right now, it's not necessarily against code. I don't think there's anything that would prohibit it, but the current regulations would make it very difficult for setback circulation. So trying to fit it in with meeting code requirements is nearly impossible. So pretty much the answer is no.
No, yeah.
Unless we were to change, yes. change a bunch of things to make it easier for that kind of development. So is that what we want in the meantime? Or yeah, keep it status quo and wait till it goes far enough downhill to do something new?
So again, we kind of sense consensus around the idea that we don't want to see significant deterioration of the uses itself. Is that generally what I'm hearing is kind of status quo? We're okay with status quo until some time where it is either a problem or the city has motivation to become a more engaged partner.
Well, I'm not, I definitely don't want a deterioration, but I think the concept of just accepting the status quo without significant city input or developmental effort is a mistake. I would say that of anything along the University Corridor in Clive, that's the area that needs the most attention. And I would put, it's easy to sit here and say, I would put a lot of emphasis on that, and I would come up with a plan to encourage developers to come in, or I would buy the property, because we don't have any of the number. I don't have any of the numbers. And I'm just maybe talking pie in the sky here. But if we don't take as a community a step forward with a vision we'll never get there. It's just like that 86th Street corridor.
But I think the problem is if you start making little incremental improvements, you raise the value, you raise the resistance to a big improvement, to the big.
Yeah, but I'm not talking little improvement. I'm misspeaking. I'm saying, no, don't make little improvements. Develop a plan, accept the plan that the city council can get behind, that the accountants can get behind, where we invest money in this area in the belief that ultimately it will be best for the city of Clive and the city corridor, and not try to do incremental now if we can avoid that, because that's just throwing good money after bad, seems to me.
Are you saying basically like prioritize that plan?
Yeah, I'm saying that. I've sat through a lot of these meetings, and I've sat through the 86th Street corridor, and I'm convinced that will never get done unless we say, we're gonna do this year, we're gonna do this next year. We have to say, do this, and now how are we gonna do it? And if this is the group of people in the city of Clive that have that vision, then we ought to express that to the head of the planning department. We think you ought to do this. Let's do something instead of talking about it, and have the money people tell us how the hell we do it, if the city council agrees.
I thought one of the things we've really been lacking is a good incentive plan. So we made reference to tax income refinancing. We have some opportunity with that, but we really don't have a pool of funds with specific incentives. And that's one of the things that was included in that report, to work on establishing something like that. We've tended to try to encourage through zoning the type of thing we would want to come in, but then you wait for someone to come in.
That incentive plan is something we've talked about for 86th Street corridor too. We haven't gotten really detailed about that.
I don't know what you mean about that, Shrikant, because there isn't anything specific about that. The Economic Vitality Committee has been having a conversation about the incentive plan, but there isn't anything specific improved yet. And it's my hope that the Economic Vitality Committee and involvement from P&Z would be really good too, is kind of identifying parts of the city where we see the value of having some incentive funds. You can see kind of what was fostered in West Des Moines in the Valley Junction area by having some incentives in place to do that. So,
And I think, just taking off of that, it does piggyback very much to what you're saying, Terry, is West Des Moines with respect to Valley Junction area. That was the thing that they said, we want this, and we're gonna go and do it. This University Park Shopping Center, for example. Again, just personally, I think it'd be a great piece of property to go and work on. But in terms of the priority of the city right now, it's 5 years out before we could get to it. Just with the other projects that are in place. So it is a prioritization issue for the city. Once you decide that you want to get into it, you definitely need to go with both barrels. I agree with that 100%. But that's our issue with the University Park Shopping Center is right now, it's just not a priority area with respect to the other things going on in the city, which again, is a policy question.
So how IDEA comes into play? I mean, we're talking about, you know, funding, what type of funding? Is there something that the state could provide to an area like that?
There are different opportunities with various fundings, whether or not it's through IDEA or lots of other. federal
Not
acronyms.
really from the state,
But most,
federal maybe.
most of those monies are generally, in terms of being able to be easily dealt with, they're going to be workforce related, employment or training related dollars that are kind of more traditionally approached. There may be some opportunities if again, we're looking at more introduction of residential where, you know, taking advantage of some tax credit opportunities or housing credit opportunities might be able to be a part of the funding package. But there's not a set of funds or programs in place that really do the thing we're talking about.
And what I'm saying is if you don't say this is what we're going to do, there will never be that fund in place.
I agree.
And if we let interim activities be developed in this area that we're talking about doing something significant in, we're just going to push that further down the road and it won't get done.
And again, we can just put aside a little bit of the, should this area be the priority of the city? Because I want to make sure that I'm hearing the consensus. Again, the idea is we don't want it to deteriorate substantially, but we also are not interested in being more accommodating to middle or inner type uses in this space. I agree.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. So I hear that one loud and clear. And that makes perfect sense.
And to tell the truth, I went to drop some things at Many Hands Thrift. That parking lot is a disaster. I mean, it is, I mean, it needs to be replaced. So maybe the buildings are okay, or maybe okay, but the area is starting to deteriorate. I mean, it is not good.
Maintenance is always that issue that will, you know, you don't have budget. Things got to kind of shrink in.
Well, they're taking those lower rents, their expenses and everything else. They got a rubber membrane roof on there too from those photos. So that's got to be done here pretty soon as well. So they're going to have a lot of issues.
Let's make sure we hit on a couple of these other big policy questions here before we let everybody loose.
So the next one, kind of to piggyback off that, was sort of the same idea, but for Valley West Mall. So ultimately, yes, Valley West Mall is on Clive, but it's important to the corridor. So as a neighboring city that has some investment there, some value that we see that's going to affect Clive, how much do we want to help out that project? Because I would only assume kind of whatever's going to go on there for a developer or for West Des Moines, they may come knocking on our door for some assistance in one way or another, whether it's just dollars or maybe some infrastructure, some other sort of ask, but I assume it's probably just dollars. But kind of along that line of how willing is Clive to help out our neighbors that do have a substantial footprint in the corridor.
And even beyond the question, maybe at some point in the future, of is the city truly, say, a financial participant in some kind of project? I think the real question is, you know, it's very normal. It's West Des Moines. It's their problem. Right? I mean, it's their side of the road, it's our side of the road, and we each kind of do our own things. But this question is really digging into this idea of are the values that are in this corridor a Clive thing or a West Des Moines thing? I mean, you know, again, is the mall so much of a critical piece to all of our successes that Clive ought to be figuring out a way to, maybe it's just Clive going and continuing to have conversations with West Des Moines and encouraging them. But building those relationships to really be involved and engaged as to try and make sure the Valley West Mall is moving hopefully in a better, more productive direction. I think it's one of those policy questions. Are we willing and interested to kind of get out of that Clive, West Des Moines mindset?
They adopt the normal street numbering. I'm all for it.
I've noted that in the minutes. That's good.
I think infrastructure wise, you know, there's a project, paths, trails, walkability, some sort of connection there, but actually funding some project on the other side of the street, I would be really reluctant to be a part of. But I would work with them. I wouldn't be an encumbrance, you know, if they want to, if they've got a wacky idea that involves some sort of trail, I think we entertain it. But I think if they were actually to ask for money, I would be really reluctant. But I don't think we shun them. I think we engage with them. I think we continue to meet with them and you know, collaborate with them as much as possible without actually funding anything on that side of the street.
One thing I push back on a little bit for that is we heard about the stormwater concerns, and a lot of that water flows downhill from West Des Moines and Clive. And we do want to have some conversation about regionalizing the expense there. So much as we look at it that way, there is some spillover opportunity if there's a good economic investment that's going to happen in Valley West Mall, that's going to help across the street there and up and down. So that is a different way to look at it too.
For sure.
I don't think you can, that is such a major piece of property, and it is on our southern border. It ties into economic development, east and west on University. We have to support that. Any reasonable effort by West Des Moines to develop that, we should be their cheerleader. We should be encouraging that. We should be asking them, what are you going to do? Is there anything we can do within reason? I'm not, once again, it's easy. I don't have the checkbook in front of me and I don't have the finances to know this. But I view that as an important component of the Clive greater neighborhood. And I would be willing to spend money. I mean, what I'm talking about is I would be willing, if I have to pay increased taxes to help do that. I think it's important to the community. I would do it, but I would engage them as often, as frequently as possible and encourage any reasonable effort to redevelop that, because that's going to become an eyesore if something doesn't happen.
And what we'd be talking about is potentially a loan, right? Not just free.
Like I said, I don't know that I would even want to presume a financial relationship.
Sure.
I'm simply kind of taking that first step of, do we want something more than, well, it's on that side of the road, West Des Moines will sort it out. You know, that's kind of the way we approach things. And I'm saying, do we want to be more engaged? Do we want to figure out ways? And honestly, it's probably not as simple as saying, hey, West Des Moines, we want to be a helper to you, because they may not want our help. Because yeah, it's not the norm. But working together, bringing the energies together on those evaluation of opportunities. You know, it's just that question of, are we satisfied with just letting West Des Moines sort it out and we're along for the ride, or do we want to really find a way to build a relationship around that space?
Doug, what you're talking about is kind of having some of our city personnel be side by side with them in some meetings, that sort of
Could
thing.
be this group, could be this group, right? I mean, it's not just staff itself. I mean, we continue to have those conversations, but there's questions of policy, there's questions of zoning and incentives and things of this nature. Again, Clive can go and do our thing, sure. But is there more value added if we're working together?
I see it a little bit differently. When I was at the City of Urbandale, I know Urbandale and Clive partner on fire services. And as I think about a community's sustainability and providing all services for residents, I think a key piece of that is the sustainability of the business community as well. So I would hate to think this would be differently. Of course, it's not a life-saving measure. I get that. But as you think of the bigger picture of someone wanting to live in this area and spend their dollars, they're not thinking of it as, well, I'm a Clive resident, I really can't go to Target because it's in West Des Moines. No one thinks that way. I've worked at a city, I get it, you think about those boundaries for your budget. I mean, it really matters. That's how you build your community, but when you have to remove those barriers and think bigger picture because it truly doesn't matter. And there are so many other examples of partnership at the city today, but with the aquatic center and with fire services, and I'm sure there are plenty others I'm not aware of. I think this is only just another opportunity to help engage another community that has a really big concern with that mall that greatly impacts the surrounding region. And I would say maybe not just stop at Clive, but look at other communities in this area too that will be hugely impacted. Should Urbandale be at the table? Should Windsor Heights be at the table? Maybe it's not just two communities, but it could be a bigger effort that really focuses on that to find something, that comes together there.
One big piece of shared infrastructure, but right in the corridor right now is the street. The maintenance of some of those activities, and then in the future, any reconstruction of it as well would have to be some sort of agreement between the streets, not to mention everything buried underneath it.
I think it's highly important as well, because what if West Des Moines decides to start having the hydroponic growing over there? I mean, it's like we just indicated we don't want that. So on this side, but what if it starts over there? That kind of the W no and the W don't. So it's kind of like.
That's a good point. Any other thoughts on that particular topic?
What should we do? How do we make this happen? Let's do it. I'm willing to go meet with, do they have a committee like this? I'll go meet with them. Let's do it. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, there'll be several opportunities. Again, it'll be a little bit of some ice breaking because this will be a little odd. But it is definitely something that we think that we can facilitate both in terms of staff as well as electives, as well as broader community base. We think that there's opportunity for all, and frankly, it's going to take all of that to make some of these things happen.
All right, I'm just going to kind of keep running through them since we're a couple hours in. I sort of at least want to touch on all of them if no one has to keep running home. But so the next one here, we sort of touched on a little bit. Potential uses of TC4. TC4 is just University Park Shopping Center, essentially. So I think we talked about that enough, but if anyone has any other thoughts, if currently, yes, the zoning code is what it is. So we prohibit some things, we allow others. Generally, status quo is going to keep it the way it is. We're going to see some vacancies because we're not going to allow every little thing that comes in if it doesn't meet code. We're not just going to jump over fences and change the code every time some new user comes in and says, I want to do this kind of odd thing here. I want to do this odd thing here. Obviously, if it's something that we think is fantastic and they have a great plan and they want to bring it to council and P&Z and say, hey, we want to change the code to allow this use, we'd see that. But if everyone's happy with that, we've kind of talked about that one. The other piece of that is on Northwest 114th Street, where we've recently done the conversion. If some of you weren't involved in that or not aware, we converted the old Sterling Inn property, which was kind of a long-term hotel sort of a user, into a multifamily. That property in particular was kind of set up for that because they had 14 separate buildings. They all had their own entrances. They had their own kitchens. They had their own bathrooms. So essentially you were renting, if you stayed there for the hotel purpose, you had a suite. So to do that conversion to a hotel wasn't that big of a jump. But we have had the question before, and we still do
pretty regularly of other hotels in Clive, whether that be 114th Street or like Clive Hotel up on Hickman, to change those into multifamily. It's a different case because that's one big building. They don't generally have, you know, kitchens. You just, like any other hotel room, it's just a room with a bathroom and a couple beds. So to convert a building like that into multifamily is kind of a different ask. So that's why Sterling Inn staff ultimately voted for approval of that project because it was so unique and different from converting another hotel. But it's been brought up in the past, it's been brought up fairly recently. So any other thoughts on that kind of a thing, or other users on 114th Street is much different than other parts of the corridor?
And I brought out the question slightly, and it's that question of incorporating residential. Again, whatever format, townhomes, row houses, multifamily, condos, whatever it is, but incorporating residential uses into these generally commercial retail spaces. Any heartburn, and again, it's gotta be the right project, it's gotta make the right sense. Conceptually, the idea of incorporating and encouraging mixed use within those commercial spaces, that's kind of the policy question.
I'll be honest, as sitting on the council, I've been one quite supportive of it because we do have a goal of increasing affordability, access. And to me, these are areas where it's valuable to have some affordable housing for people who are working in retail and have access to transit along University and Hickman, that kind of thing. So I was an early supporter of the Sterling Inn proposal. It took other council members a while to come along. So I'm not necessarily saying that it's interesting to.
Where is the Sterling Inn?
Just up the street here.
Okay, is it the one that's tucked back along the interstate?
Yes.
Yeah, it now has the sign of the 5.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I know which
So like that conversion was a win-win. It made the property more valuable. It provided residential. It was a degrading property that got money invested. And I think, to point with both of you, it was on a case-by-case basis, that one made a lot of sense. Others won't make sense. In general, I have no beef with the idea of adding residential in the middle of commercial areas. People will give, the people who want to live there can live there. I mean, maybe they're commuters, and being that close to the highway is really a big factor. But I think that the case-by-case nature is important. The city is benefiting from that conversion.
Other thoughts?
I just had, I don't know what's good or bad, right or wrong on this issue, but it struck me talking about building a lot of multi-residential units, you're talking about converting hotels to multi-residential units. And presumably there's going to be children living in these units. We're going to increase the amount of children. So does somebody in the accounting department look at, okay, if we develop these things, it's going to increase the number of children in Clive, which are going to increase the need for school teachers in school? Is that part of the equation that you all look at in the planning department?
Yeah, I would say, like with respect to the conversion of the Sterling Hotel to a multifamily residential, absolutely. Beyond just kids, calls for service for EMS and police, needs for utilities, impacts to the library, all of those things went into the calculus of, is this a good deal for the city or not? So I would say any of those kinds of projects, yes, we'll evaluate them from a very much a nuts and bolts fiscal perspective. This broader question of kind of new ground development, adding a multifamily or adding a townhome or adding a condo in some of these underutilized parking lots, or again, University Park Shopping Center getting completely repurposed to a residential use, or maybe have a mix of uses, is absolutely a foreign concept to Clive's suburbia. We very much like our commercial separated from a residential separated by townhomes or whatever it is, you know. So what we're saying is just that on a philosophical basis, are we okay with evolving from that very standard type of zoning to something that allows for a broad range mix of uses? That's it in a nutshell.
Any idea what the occupancy rate of the apartment complexes are in that area? I mean, is there a need for apartments? Are we, putting the cart before the horse or changing something when no one's actually gonna come to us and approach it?
I think there's always a need for apartments.
Yeah.
Chris knows the answer to this because.
And that's kind of it's got its own area as far as an apartment would go, the 86th Street corridor through there, plenty of units.
So you can look at this really from a metro-wide standard. Our occupancy rates are really high. That's why we're seeing so much demand and so much construction of apartments. Frankly, our high interest rates are definitely pushing demand because there'll be less owner-occupied purchase. Where the big demand is for the more affordable units, the more workforce, rather than the high-end stuff like what we're seeing in downtown.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I want to understand what we were trying to place here. Because I mean, if we're going for like $1,800 to $2,000 a month, 2 bedrooms, I don't know that that's ever going to work in this area.
And the one thing, just to kind of close the loop, because I think Doug's spot on, as every one of these projects will need to be looked at from just to verify we've got sewer and water capacity, calls for service, traffic, those types of things. Generally, which is one reason why we're pushing the number of bedroom units, they don't produce a lot of children. And in our developed areas of the community, frankly, having more kids is a good thing because we already have a school district infrastructure. The kids' growth always seems to be in the new areas of town. And so this can be a really healthy thing to help prop up our existing elementary schools.
Anecdotally, the folks at the former Sterling, now the Edge.
The vibe.
Vibe, sorry, Vibe.
3580.
80-30. They are doing very well with the conversions thus far. We're able to, I think, Doug, to accelerate sort of this timeline for finishing up the conversion of the final parts of the property that they hadn't touched yet. One of the primary reasons they're finding success, they shared with us, is the proximity to the interstate. That it's easy in and out to wherever folks need to go to work. And it's also priced at a price point that a lot of folks can get into.
I'm not sure I'm quite getting consensus to the idea of residential was acceptable input into our suburban environment as a pushback from other folks.
I think you're going to need it to sustain some of the retail we'd like to see happen. If you put a bunch of that first floor retail, you're going to need. I'm not advocating for multi-use buildings by any means, but I think if you've got a couple strip retail buildings anchored by an apartment building, I think you've got an opportunity then for them to utilize the strip center as well as, and parking becomes more of an issue, but I think you're going to need it for sure. I'd advocate for more multifamily.
I see more head nods, so.
And it's case by case too, whatever makes sense.
Yes.
It's gonna be maybe more work for the city and for, people to make sense here, but it doesn't make sense there, but I wouldn't put like policy that this is what we're gonna do everywhere because it might not work in certain areas.
Makes sense.
But the areas that you have proposed, like the Sterling, the reason that they went to that unit, as I understood it, to this multifamily, was they weren't making it economically with the residential. Yeah, am I right?
They weren't making it as a hotel.
As a hotel.
Yeah.
So if we don't agree to expand, then what is the alternative? That some owners won't make money and the property will die or become that university park? I mean, we either evolve or it dies, it seems to me. It's not because there's no other alternative that somebody suggested. So
It would be,
Like, I've seen some of the like luxury apartments kind of pop up, like the Caliber over in Waukee, they also have one in Otter Creek. Where it's like floor to ceiling, windows and luxury amenities and whatnot. I think it's also limited space. I guess, has there been any kind of study done on that, or is there, kind of I saw the green space behind the area we're talking about, would something like that be kind of viable where it's, it's not that affordable housing piece necessarily, but it's, it's a desired place to live with a view or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, I think certainly many of these types of redevelopment opportunities, that's what it's going to try to gravitate to. I mean, just the demographics, the economics of our environment, that's kind of where things are going to go. And as long as the project can support the higher end, right, because of the amenities or because of the positioning or whatever it is, that's typically where someone's going to want to invest.
Yeah.
I think the secondary question to that, from a city policy perspective, is we are very good at producing expensive homes. I mean, again, you heard it tonight. We're going to do $500,000 townhomes. We don't do a very good job as a community of having housing and price points to support workforce.
Right.
And it's a measure of things, not just a lot. So yes, I think redevelopment is probably going to want to aim for that higher end economic. And then it's a question of, is affordability one of those wants from the city and are we going to facilitate? All right, we got one last piece that we need to get some input on. I'll let you go. It's this question of branding. Thoughts on whether or not it makes sense to partner with the city of West Des Moines on trying to create some kind of unique or corridor brand to bring awareness to the area, either on the short term or the long term. Maybe it doesn't make sense to kind of make those types of investments now. Maybe you need some momentum before you get into kind of a brand effort, but just wanted to get some quick thoughts on ideas or concepts around this idea of branding the corridor.
And ultimately with that, I mean, it's kind of an easy idea to say, yeah, sure, go ahead, why not? Maybe do some branding if everyone's about it, but there probably will be some sort of cost. Probably not substantial, but it's gonna cost something. Yeah. To be able to put those up.
And ultimately you can relabel it whatever you want, but everyone's like, oh yeah, the old Valley West Mall, that, I'm down for branding. I think it's a great idea. I just don't know how you break the old.
I think it has to wait, but I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, Kansas City did it with Power and Light.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible.
If you have the vision area that you
Right. No, so I'm on board. That's the great part of the transition to this something new, it was the Valley West Mall area, now it's this. So no, I think we have to.
Work together on it.
Yeah.
Don't do one thing on one side of the street.
Yeah, don't come with two different plans.
And Doug, I think you said, or maybe someone said that maybe we need some type of investment to happen first before it makes sense to have a brand. But I would argue that this plan is the investment that can be the catalyst to start. I think you've already got some momentum going now in both communities. People are starting to realize, hey, these two communities are together, they're taking note of this area. They've invested money in this plan with compliments of others. I think that can be the springboard to say, okay, now we want to actually wrap our arms around this area even more and further define it to continue that focus. I think one of the benefits of having a brand of an area is you can kind of dribble out that message and use that brand as a springboard to help keep the focus on that area. So I think it could be a great thing.
So
In partnership, of course.
beautification, will that be part of the branding?
very well could be, kind of having some of those, I would hope it wouldn't just be, like I call it, pop art, plop a sign here, plop a sign there, if it's integrated with whatever it is, the landscape element or within adjacent right-of-way space or enhancing a bus stop, whatever it might be, or enhancing the interstate interchange as an opportunity. Hopefully it'd be something beyond just plop.
One thing I'd offer from the 86th Street neighborhood plan when it comes to identity of these spaces, the placemaking. We asked the group, the neighborhood there, whether there was any consensus on what the name of their neighborhood was. And there was nothing. Similar to the way I guessed that those commercial tenants, existing businesses might think about their relationship to folks on the far east side versus the far west side. There are very different purposes between those businesses on the far east and the far west. And then proximity to certain neighborhoods tends to have a little bit of stickiness to it as well. The folks who live in Clark Street neighborhood or the Indian Hills neighborhood don't think of themselves as living in the 86th Streets neighborhood or even necessarily University Park corridor. So there's existing identity that we will need to work with if we start to go down this storytelling placemaking path.
What I would hope that a combined branding approach would lead to is things like if we do end up building some of those bus stops that were noted in the plan, that they're complementary on opposite sides of the street, that some of the building facades on new buildings start to be more complementary to each other across the street. Flags hanging from the poles are complementary to each other, that the look becomes uniform.
I'm all for West Des Moines hanging up greenbelt goat signs. So that's an improved look for them. I think. No, sorry to everybody going from West Des Moines on the call. Sorry.
My property backs to the north end of University Park, the green spot, and I don't think of myself as living in University Park. About Indian Hills.
Yep.
Any other thoughts? I think we've got a pretty good sense that the idea of the partnership, trying to create some brand awareness for the corridor, whatever the brand is, whatever it is, but try to engage in some level of effort to start soon or sooner with capturing what this corridor should be in terms of this brand. I think I heard that. Again, a lot of lifting tonight. Appreciate you slugging through with us, but great input, super helpful in our abilities to kind of wrap this thing up, bring specific recommendations to the city council for their consideration. I don't speak for you guys, but I know that the council values this type of input. So it is very helpful to us. I think it's very helpful to the elected folks as well, and will ultimately result in a better output for the city. An outcome for us. So again, thanks for the time. Look forward to some additional conversations down the road, both in terms of economic vitality committee and certainly on P&Z, and maybe there'll be some other opportunities for us to collaborate together. Because I thought this was a good conversation that we had. So thank you all. See you later.
P&Z, 5 minutes or
The only thing left.
right. We're gonna have to do whether the city sheds out this, then we have to start. Our group. Did anyone say? Oh, all right.
Kelly.
Oh, not like the other plan where we had to vote. Oh. Okay, then it's because
All we gotta
okay,
do is
the staff report. Staff report?
Amanda, okay.
We have a discussion on the university corridor.
I'm trying to think. I don't think anything else coming down the line. I don't think
Been a lot of them.
I know it's scheduled with them, but I want to ask.
We're post Christmas.
Okay. All right, so.
No, I don't have anything. I don't have anything.
Negative staff.
All right, and we don't have to do a motion on this plan. So is there anyone else anytime? All right. Adjourn 7:58.
See you next month.